For years, people blamed Barbra Streisand's diva behavior for the tension between her and Robert Redford on set. But when Jane Fonda spoke up about her time with Redford, the story took a dark, unexpected turn. Robert Redford was born in 1936 in California. He reportedly always had a rebellious streak, even as a child. When he became a teenager, he was even in a gang of boys called the Barons. The crew began breaking and entering and performing acts of petty theft. Redford had his reasons for acting out. He experienced a series of horrific tragedies as a child, including the death of his favorite uncle. Then, just after he graduated high school, his mother died from septicemia. Redford turned to art to help him process these difficult events. He even spent time in Europe trying to be a visual artist, but he wasn't very successful at it. In the end, he sold all of his pieces in a street sale and only managed to scrape enough money for a ticket back to America. After his disastrous time in Europe, he switched his focus to acting and began working in the theater. Nearly overnight, everything changed. In 1969, Redford was cast as Sundance Kid in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid opposite screen icon Paul Newman. He became an international success, and it's still one of his most identifiable roles to date. It also helped create the image of Redford as a leading man with a sharp wit. But the truth is, Redford came very close to losing out on this iconic role. The studio did not want Redford for the part. His co-star Paul Newman was already an established star, and he was over a decade older than him. Newman, the film's writer William Goldman, and director George Roy Hill banded together to convince studio executives to cast Redford. In hindsight, though, the executives may have had a point. Redford may not have been ready for what happened to him once the movie came out. Redford had experienced some success on Broadway when he starred in Barefoot in the Park, but this was nothing compared to the reaction to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He was completely unprepared for the massive amounts of attention he was now receiving. Having gone from starving artist to Hollywood heartthrob in a dizzyingly quick amount of time, Redford struggled to keep a clear head. When going out in public, he put on disguises, changed his name, and even once pretended he was an exchange student from Bogota. Despite the disguises, Redford could not hide his face, and all Hollywood could talk about was how he looked. For Redford, this was even more uncomfortable than his newfound fame. He did not want to feel like just a pretty face, but his looks were about to be the least of his worries. During his time on Broadway, Redford married Lola Van Wagenen. Shortly after, the couple had a baby boy they named Scott Redford. Then, the unspeakable happened. Just a few months after he was born, baby Scott died. It was a terrible tragedy, but the couple did not give up on having a family. By the time Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid hit theaters, Redford and Van Wagenen were already raising 2 more children, with a third on the way. His family life was expanding just as his career was about to explode. The early 1970s belonged to Robert Redford. In 1973, he reunited with co-star Paul Newman for The Sting, which earned him the only Academy Award nomination for Best Actor of his career. The film was such a smash that the studio even re-released Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, betting audiences still craved more Newman-Redford magic. But that same year, Redford met his Hollywood match. In 1973, he starred opposite Barbra Streisand in the romantic drama The Way We Were. Though it has since become a classic of the romance genre, making the film was anything but romantic. From the beginning, Redford did not want the role. He knew Streisand mostly from musicals and didn't consider her a serious actress, the exact kind of reputation he was desperate to build for himself. And it went downhill from there. Director Sydney Pollack spent months coaxing Redford onto the project, which told the story of Hubble Gardner, Redford, and Katie Morosky, Streisand, two people fighting to stay together despite their differences. Redford openly mocked his own role, calling Hubble camp, and even describing him as a Ken doll. He did not shy away from criticizing his co-star either. Redford not only doubted Streisand's ability to act, he also feared she would turn the film into one of her musicals, especially since she ended up singing its theme song the way we were. Worse still, he knew her reputation as a controlling diva and said, "She will direct herself. It'll never work." After 8 long months of negotiations, Redford finally gave in. That's when the real drama began. There were constant rewrites and conflicts with the studio, but the fiercest clashes were between Redford and Streisand themselves. Streisand was allegedly infatuated with Redford, feelings he did not return. This imbalance made their intimate scenes awkward from the very beginning. Despite Streisand's reputation for diva behavior, Redford was the one refusing to say certain lines. In one scene, he refused to say, "It will be better this time," worried it would imply he wasn't impressive in the bedroom. Even after 12 producer memos and a post-production plea, Redford never uttered the words. In another scene, there was a tender moment where Streisand's character brushes his bangs aside. Redford's Hubble was meant to make a joke about going gray. Redford flat out refused to say that as well. Clearly, he was dealing with some insecurities during the shoot. Redford and Streisand both insisted on getting their way, and it caused a lot of tension on set. Each actor insisted on being filmed from the left side, Streisand because she disliked how her nose looked from the right, and Redford because he hated the moles on that side of his face. Redford eventually got his revenge. In one scene, he deliberately turned Streisand's head toward her dreaded bad side. She froze mid-performance, furious. Despite the issues on set, The Way We Were became an instant hit and the 5th highest grossing film of the year. Unfortunately for Redford, it was Streisand who got most of the accolades. At the Oscars, she was nominated for Best Actress and won Best Original Song, as well as Best Original Dramatic Score. Meanwhile, Redford was not nominated at all. Redford's work in The Way We Were reunited him with director Sydney Pollack, who had directed him in his 2 previous films. They would go on to work on 4 more films together. Redford described them as kindred spirits. The pair worked well together. Pollack's films were where Redford, comfortable in the collaboration, hit his stride as an actor. Still, there was one thing the actor did that drove the director mad. Occasionally, Redford would pointedly ask Pollack why he had the camera set up in a specific direction and why he wasn't framing something else. Pollack's response was sharp. He drew the line at Redford giving unsolicited directing advice. Redford reported that if he got too inquisitive on set, Pollack would say, "Would you mind? Go have a coffee. Go sit in the woods for a while." Then again, there were things about Redford's acting that Pollack hated, too. Redford was a fantastic actor, but he was particularly bad about matching in a scene, that is, keeping the continuity of his character's actions. Redford recalled how Pollack would say, "You're driving me crazy. You had a peach in your hand in the first part of the scene. What happened to it?" Years later, Redford said he replied to Pollack about the peach debacle by saying, "I'd be more concerned if I didn't have a peach in my hand in the beginning of the scene and I suddenly had one." Redford always liked being in charge, and he wasn't one to back down. Soon, however, he was about to gain more control than he ever imagined. In 1972, a controversy erupted that would alter the course of his career. The Watergate scandal broke wide open, ultimately toppling President Richard Nixon. At the center of the storm were reporters Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, guided by their shadowy source, Deep Throat, As they delivered relentless, gripping coverage of the story, Redford wasted no time sensing a career opportunity he could not miss out on. Redford knew a good narrative when he saw it, and he was in contact with Bob Woodward just months after the story broke. 2 years later, after Woodward and Bernstein's book All the President's Men came out, Redford jumped into the bidding war to buy the rights for a film adaptation, eventually winning them. Redford wanted to take a step back from acting and focus on producing All the President's Men, but fate had other plans. Since bidding on the film rights had gone so high, investors wanted a bankable star. Redford ended up taking the part of Bob Woodward alongside Dustin Hoffman as Carl Bernstein, in addition to acting as producer. As both an actor and a producer on the film, Redford had to juggle multiple massive egos for months and even years. He brought on William Goldman, who had written Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, to write the script. But Carl Bernstein had other plans. The Watergate reporter was married to screenwriter Nora Ephron, and after Goldman's first draft failed to impress, the pair presented Redford with their own competing script. Goldman's later draft eventually prevailed, though the writer still described the process and Redford's involvement as a gutless betrayal. In the end, however, all the conflict paid off. Redford's performance as Bob Woodward, less flashy than Dustin Hoffman's Carl Bernstein, but magnetic in its own way, is considered one of the finest of his career. Even more, All the President's Men was nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards, and its loss to Rocky in 1977 became an instant controversy. At last, Redford felt like he was moving forward. In 1980, he took on an entirely new role. After years in front of the camera, Redford stepped into directing. His directorial debut was the film Ordinary People. Released in 1980, the film was both a critical and commercial success. Many praised Redford for enticing raw, emotional performances from his cast, especially Mary Tyler Moore. Still, it was not a flawless debut, and some of the shortcomings were his own fault. When it came to Ordinary People, Redford had one noticeable miss. During pre-production, a young and then unknown Michael J. Fox auditioned for a role. Redford did not see his potential. Reportedly unimpressed, he allegedly even flossed his teeth during the audition. On set, Redford made further mistakes. Before directing Ordinary People, Redford admitted that during his acting career, he had paid little attention to what happened behind the camera, except, of course, when he was pestering Pollack. But when he stepped into the director's chair, his inexperience quickly became apparent. Assistants asked him which lenses he wanted to use, and he had to scramble for an answer. To communicate his vision, he turned to sketches, drawing storyboards on scraps of paper for his director of photography. Fortunately, his time spent working on his visual art paid off. His approach worked, and he adapted quickly, finding his footing as a filmmaker. Still, his mind may have been elsewhere since his personal life was unraveling. In 1982, an entertainment outlet reported that Redford and his wife, Lola Van Wagenen, had separated. Yet in Hollywood, the news was hardly shocking. One reporter remarked that the couple had been very much apart for a number of years. Never one to talk about his private life, Robert Redford kept the reasons for their split private. Even as late as the 1990s, it remained unclear whether the couple had ever formally divorced. Just a few years later, Redford starred in Sydney Pollack's Out of Africa with Meryl Streep. The film became an instant classic. It won Best Picture at the Academy Awards, and Streep earned a nomination for Best Actress. But once again, Redford went unrecognized. Despite the film's success, he wasn't nominated for any awards. Every legendary actor has their sliding doors moments, iconic roles that slipped through their fingers. Redford, though, has more than most. Each one feels like a greater lost opportunity than the last. In 1972, he was considered for the role of Michael Corleone in The Godfather, the part that earned Al Pacino 2 Oscar nominations. And there were more misses to come. In 1982, Redford was set to star in The Verdict, directed by Sidney Lumet, but problems arose almost immediately. Sensitive about how his roles might reflect on him personally, Redford disliked the way his character, Frank Galvin, was written. He insisted that Galvin should not be such a loser. Sidney Lumet, however, was no Sydney Pollack. The director refused to bend. Lumet didn't take Redford's meddling with the character well, and became upset by the actor's continued attempts to change the script. Eventually, it hit a breaking point, and Redford dropped out of the film. But there was a twist. His old co-star, Paul Newman, took up the role in his place, and got an Oscar nomination in the process. Yet the biggest role Redford lost out on wasn't his fault at all, or not intentionally anyway. In 1967, when Redford was still trying to make a name for himself, he was desperate for the neurotic lead part in the upcoming and iconic film The Graduate. Directed by his friend Mike Nichols, Nichols refused to cast him, saying, "You can't play it. You can never play a loser." Redford, still itching for the part, refused to back down, so Nichols asked him just one question: had a woman ever rejected him? Reportedly, this was so beyond Redford's experience that he could only look confused, proving Nichols' point. Eventually, Nichols cast Redford's future All the President's Men co-star, Dustin Hoffman, in the part, who also picked up an Oscar nomination for the role. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Redford turned more and more to directing and stepped away from acting. He directed The Milagro Beanfield War in 1988, A River Runs Through It in 1992, and then Quiz Show 2 years after that. In the meantime, he took on very few acting roles, as one critic noted. Robert Redford may have become a more complacent movie star in the last decade, but he has become a more daring and accomplished filmmaker. Redford was also one of the main drivers behind the Sundance Film Festival, which takes place in Utah, where Redford owns property, and which is named after perhaps his most famous role, the Sundance Kid. The festival continues to win acclaim today. Redford, meanwhile, has come under fire. Robert Redford was a Hollywood legend, but another legend has weighed in on the actor. After working with him on both Barefoot in the Park and The Electric Horseman, Jane Fonda said that Redford is always in a bad mood and does not like to kiss on film. According to Fonda, Redford's reluctance to kiss her, and even his reluctance to kiss co-stars like Barbra Streisand in The Way We Were, stemmed from his issues with women. As Fonda put it, he's a good person. He just has an issue with women. Whether Fonda was right or not, Redford's behavior on set could certainly be challenging at times. Yet Redford could also act like a true gentleman. When he was younger, Redford went to school with actress Natalie Wood. Years later, while filming 1965's Inside Daisy Clover, he eased the tension during a particularly frightening moment. They were shooting on a boat that became stranded at sea, and seeing Wood's distress at being in open water, Redford helped calm her down. Nearly 2 decades later, Natalie Wood would drown during a yachting trip. Her fear of open water was clearly not unwarranted. In 2009, Robert Redford married his longtime girlfriend, Sybil Sagers, and the couple lived together in Hamburg, Germany. Sadly, Robert Redford died in his sleep on September 16, 2025, at the age of 89. When the news broke, tributes from many of his famous friends came flooding in, including one from Meryl Streep, who wrote, "One of the lions has passed. Rest in peace, my lovely friend." If you enjoyed this Factinate video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories. Want a say in who we cover next? Join our membership program through the link in the description for exclusive perks. Your support means everything to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.